Kate, thanks so much for joining us today on the Sporting Transition podcast. Incredibly grateful for your time. This is officially season two. This is officially the sixth recording of season two, and you're also our first female rugby guest for the season. Yeah, there you go. So really, really grateful for your time. For whatever reason, it's just harder to find female guests to attend the rugby season. I don't know why, can't work it out. I've got a few intros now, which is good. So definitely one of the follow-ups in this session will be, can you introduce anyone to me? But anyway, we'll pick up on that later. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, and we'd love to kick off with just an intro from yourself. Who you are, what your sport is, and I'm sure that will kind of spearhead us into a good session about your transition from rugby into other areas of life.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Number one, love being a part of season two. Means you got kind of through season one, all the learning. So now you're on to the real stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but my name's Kate Zachary. I play rugby. Been playing rugby for a little over, gosh, 10, 12 years now. I picked it up a bit later in life compared to others. But currently USA Rugby captain. Hopefully going to my third World Cup later this year, and also play my club rugby in England for Trailfinders Women based out of Ealing.
Super. Well, very impressive introduction. There's a lot to kind of tap into there, but I think what we'll probably do is just start off with a kind of easy question. I sort of know the answer, but I'm going to ask it, which is, what was your first love in terms of sport?
Soccer or football for those across the pond from the States. Grew up playing it since as far as I can remember. My brothers played it a little bit so I've got three older siblings. The oldest one's 9 years older, next one's 4 years older, my sister's a year and a half. But so my two older brothers picked it up in their youth, and my dad started coaching like most parents do, like I'll help. So obviously ended up him toting all kids around every weekend. And yeah, my sister and I think from my understanding, just would steal a ball, kick it around. And so since I was four, just kind of fell in love with it. I was thankful that my parents, when we were younger, would always kind of force us to do a different sport. So, I tried your
Mm.
softballs, played a little bit of basketball, but from four all the way through university, I played soccer every season, whether it was, regular soccer, whether it's 7v7 pickup, futsal in the winter on a basketball court, indoor soccer in the boarded rooms, you named it, I tried to play it. So yeah, through and through, big soccer player.
Very cool. And are you being a little bit modest here that you got a scholarship for soccer?
Yes. So I was lucky, as a lot of like athletes in the States. It's one of the easiest ways to get into school. I like to think I'm an intelligent person as well, but I really put all my eggs in the basket of being athletic and getting that scholarship to university. So went to a small NAIA school called College.
Mm.
So you've got NCAA and then you've got NAI, the other governing body for athletics, it was a great school, great soccer program. We ended up going on winning conference a few times, making our first bout ever to the national championship tournament during my 4 year stint as well. And yeah, was lucky as well to pick up a few individual accolades for like teams of the season and scholar athlete and stuff. So I wasn't all sports. I did go to school and study quite hard.
Like we all have done. And talk us through the rugby component. So what time, at what age, or when did you switch to rugby and decide, okay, this is my new thing? What switched your love from essentially looking at playing football and scholarship to then going to rugby?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about the States is we still have a lot of people coming into the rugby community as crossover athletes, we would call them. And
Mm.
so I was like most, saw it in university. Well, actually, both my brothers dabbled in it when they finished American football in university. They went out, played a little bit of rugby, had a bit of fun before moving on to their careers in life and stuff. So I knew of this sport called rugby, but I got to university, saw it for the first time, actually played. Had no idea about it, exactly what it meant, how it played, but my roommate actually went out for the team, made the club team for attached to our university. So, like all good roommates, went and supported her, started to become friends with a lot of the team, and just enjoyed the community. So, for my 4 years of university, I went to a lot of rugby games. Never understood how
Mm.
you could win a game by winning 3 tries to 4 tries for the longest time. I didn't understand the conversion concept. Um, yeah, so there's little bits like that that were quite funny. But senior year, fast forward of university, it's 2011. I'm in my spring semester, soccer's over for me, starting to think about life ahead. So I've got my degree classes are finished. I'm taking a few art classes, just finishing out the school year. I thought, why not? I actually ran indoor track that winter just because I wanted to keep the competition life going. And then rugby in the spring, went out for the club team. A lot of my friends were playing. All of our games got canceled. We just trained, had socials on the weekends and enjoyed my spring turn.
Mm,
And yeah, the next fall, actually, they invited me. My first ever rugby game was their alumni rugby game in the fall. So they said, "You're an honorary alumni. You've never actually played a game, but you've always been a super fan. You went to training all spring, so play in our alumni game." So that was my first ever rugby game as an alumni for a team I really never played for. Played a few games for them here and there before. After I moved away, started working. I moved back to my alma mater. Started working as the web content manager and
mm,
spent my days running to the gym, biking, missing some competitive edge. So um, went back and started playing rugby because it was the only pickup. It was like a town of 10,000 people, so there's no sports really going
mm.
on. So it's like do a bit of CrossFit. Is when the CrossFit kicked off. Rugby then had an opportunity to do something organized, something competitive on the weekends, and that's kind of how I fell into it. It's just honestly a bit of competitive opportunity at the time.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, got there's tons of questions in here. The first one is which is tougher, American football or rugby?
Yeah, rugby. It's the beauty is,
Yeah.
and the way I explain to people in the States is like, you like American football because you like the contact and the hits and that kind of stuff, but you like soccer slash obviously football for the continuity and it's a longer game, but it's constantly flowing. It's those two married, obviously, as we know, rugby came
Versus,
before and
yeah,
these
yeah,
grew from it, but in America we have to think about it reversed. So those two married, you have rugby. Continuity with
yeah, yeah.
hits. And how exciting is that?
Okay, interesting. And is that a controversial opinion or is that
Probably a little bit, depending on who you speak to. But once
uh,
they come to rugby game, they fall in love with it.
yeah, yeah, understandably, but I completely agree with the flowing component to it. Cool. And what stopped you believing in soccer as a potential outcome from your scholarship? Why decide that's the end? And in a way, you almost got two transition, right? You finish soccer to then rugby, and then obviously the second one is rugby to whatever next. But yeah, just curious to know what led you to stop soccer
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like most young kids, right, you aspire to see your last name on a jersey playing for your country. I had that vision when I was in my 10s, 12s, 14s. After missing out on opportunities to go play for ODP camps, which is Olympic development programs, which
mm,
years ago especially, those were kind of the pathway to your national team setups. Since then, you've obviously now had the MWSL startup, like the
mm,
MLS. You then have academies and they start looking lower. So the pathways changed, but at the time you either went to an ODP camp to ever get noticed. The bigger universities went to ODP camps and ODP teams. So unfortunately missed out on going to those a couple injuries and financials and things like that. So played club rugby and or excuse me, club soccer, enjoyed it. My parents coached it. We actually had a really great team. Kind of players from all over Kansas, where I grew up. And yeah, I had a lot of fun, but I think the reality was I probably hadn't just reached my full potential as a soccer player. Went to a great university, played and enjoyed it. But during that time, I think realized I was good, but I don't know that I would ever make a US soccer national team. The reality sets in. But what I could do is be the best player I could be in university.
mm.
Went to a tryout for the early stages of the Women's Professional Soccer League. Yeah, didn't get a call back, but it was a couple years after I graduated, so I was a little bit out of touch, anyways. And yeah, so I think it just kind of slow. It was probably a slow build even before I got to university. I think I recognized the likelihood of me going much further was not high, and that was okay. But what I could do is enjoy 4 really competitive years before moving on to the real world.
That's interesting. So what was your kind of first career then when you decided to stop soccer? You then probably are deciding, you're starting to play rugby for fun on the side, which then becomes more dominant. But at that point, you're probably also starting to think, okay, what's life like after soccer? So yeah, just interested to know where was your head at already at that point in terms of, what a career looks like beyond sport.
Yeah. So I graduated university. I went actually and interned for the NAI, which, like I said, was kind of our governing body, similar to NCAA. So worked there for just under a year as an intern, in their marketing and graphics department. So helped put together manuals, send out championship banners, did some design work. When a job opened up back at my alma mater, Benedictine College, so moved back and became the web administrator. So I studied was like a broad degree of mass communications with an art minor. So basically, my cover was a little bit of computer science, graphic design, and marketing. So yeah, moved back to my university and actually started my first real job. Yeah, web administrator. I managed the whole school website, building out the pages, improving user experience, accessibility, and things like that. So did that for about 2 years, and that's when I started playing rugby. um, it's interesting. That's then when my international journey started to kick off. So, fast forward to the spring of 2014. So by that point, I've been an intern. I've now held down a real job for 2 years. I was also a
Mhm.
co-owner of a gym in the small town of Atchison, Kansas. I was looking at buying a house. My mom had gone with me to some viewings, doing the whole like go to the bank, see what your loan status is. I'm 24 years old, thinking this is cool, 401ks, all this stuff. Yeah, we get this email from this gentleman who's recruiting for a U23 rugby team. And at the time, the states were doing regional competitions for rugby for their pathway. So trying to figure out, U23s from there, they could start identifying any like potential players for the senior side and the national team. I don't really
Mm.
know that much about it, but I just got this email. I emailed this man back and I just said, "Hey, thanks. I'm 24. I'm too old, but sounds good." And he was like, "Oh, but like just send me your details. What's your 40 time? What's this?" And I was like, "Look, like I'm good, thank you." I'm at a tournament a couple weeks later and I run into this gentleman. His name's Bryn Chivers. So he's been what you'll find out is actually the pivotal moment for my rugby career. This man is just trying to
Mm.
recruit U23s, and he comes on the field. He says, "Kate," I don't know who he is. He runs out. I'm in Wayne, Nebraska, middle of Nebraska, nowhere. I know no one there. And anyways, he introduces himself, is insistent that I should play, tells me about all these women's teams around the states that I could move and I could play for, and that I would be a gifted athlete and I should try it. And I was like, "Thank you, but again, I have a house, I have a 401k, like I have a savings account, I got
Mhm.
a job, I own a gym, like things are cool." Um, and he doesn't let go of this idea. So a couple like I think it was like a week later, he calls me again, says, "Hey, like, can you go to a USA Sevens camp over Easter? What are you doing in like 3 weeks?" And I was like, "What?" I played one midnight sevens tournament, which was just to like make a couple $100. You just go pay with your friends, have a few beers, call it a weekend. But he was like, you can't say no. It's 5 days." It's like, okay, you know what? Fine. So yeah, Easter of 2014, I go to a USA Sevens camp under the coach of
Mm.
the time, Rick Suggett, who was big on trying to bring over crossover athletes. So right before I even went, you had like your Lev Kelters. She had just gone in February. She crossed over from hockey after missing out on some competitions with USA
Mm.
Hockey. So it was, yeah, shortly after they announced rugby would be in the Rio Olympics in 2016, and all the countries are starting to make this big shift on not only how do we find rugby players, but how do we find athletes, and that was kind of Rick's philosophy as well. So time and place, I guess. And one man, Bryn Chivers, believing that this
Yeah.
young lady he saw in Kansas was a pretty big deal.
And then does the introduction of rugby sevens to the Olympics act as a big motivator as well? So does it feel like it kind of creates more substance or adds substance to this new kind of direction you're potentially taking?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it had such a huge effect. Like, not only myself, but we had a couple girls, like some of the best basketball players who missed out on going out to your WNBAs and that
Mm.
type of stuff. You had some track athletes who, once again, fantastic sprinters, just weren't ever going to make it any further. So you're taking all of these really
Mm.
athletic people who don't know rugby, but are at the top of their game. They're just missing out on that top 10%. Well, if they can run and they can catch, you can teach them how to do the rest with rugby, can't you? And that was kind of their philosophy was like, "Look, I can teach you rugby, I just can't teach you to be athletic."
Yeah, that makes sense. But you have Rick, you have 2014, you start playing more seriously, obviously, but you're having to make decisions about 401ks, mortgages. So how did how did those two kind of work Did they work or did they not? Is it impossible to hold down a mortgage whilst also like committing yourself to a career in rugby?
Yeah, definitely. So, I hadn't quite bought a house yet. We'd been looking at one. We were really interested in this one there in a small town, Ashland, Kansas, where I was working. And so I go to camp in April, and it's like the last week of May, middle of May, and I get this phone call on a Sunday morning, and it's Rick Sugget, and they're on their way back from Amsterdam Sevens. He says, "Hey, like, uh, do you want to come out on a 6-month contract to USA Sevens? Move out next month." I was like, he's like, talk to your family. Obviously, it's a big decision. Think about it. And obviously, talking to my parents, talking to my friends and stuff at the time was like, it's 6 months. Like, even when I spoke to work, they were very amenable to like, let's see what the next 6 months bring. Like, go on leave. We have people who can kind of manage your job, like make sure everything's ready to go. The website's not going down anytime soon. So like we can survive the next 6 months. So the nice part is I went with the intent of only being there for 6 months and coming back come
Mm.
December of 2014 and starting back into work. So yeah, I just at the time put life effectively on pause in Kansas with the intent of coming back. I never went back. That's the secret. Um, but yeah, so I moved out in June thinking, yeah, it's just a little temporary stopover. Why not? Like you only live once. What's 6 months of your life trying this
Yeah.
elite sport?
But does it feel a bit crazy looking back now, to be sat where you are now in London, to know that you've come from a little town in Kansas? Do you kind of
Yeah.
pinch yourself sometimes and think this is quite crazy?
Yeah. No, it's definitely like it's a humbling look back in my journey. And, I'm not the only one who's had this kind of crazy journey, especially in
Mm,
the States where, as I mentioned, crossover athletes just come from all sorts of walks of life. So you're taking all these people in their early 20s, who find this sport and all of a sudden they're willing to like make some changes, see what happens. And especially like the good ones, the ones with a lot of potential, their lives are about to change. And so yeah, mine was just like that. And it's crazy to think now I've traveled the world multiple times. Yeah, I've moved. I'm playing on a professional contract in England. I met my wife through rugby. I've met some of my best friends through rugby. Um, and yeah, it's just quite a cool experience to think back and be like, well, what would I have been doing if I was still in
yeah.
Kansas? Um, it's a bit scary to think about, maybe.
Yeah. Like, it must be surreal, really, to kind of recount that journey. Um, it's interesting you mentioned your employer was quite relaxed about seeing you disappear for 6 months. I mean, how important is it for you to have employers who are very understanding of athletes? Because I've interestingly enough, actually, I've interviewed people who have been in that kind of still committed to sport, but obviously want to start work. And it's always made me feel a little bit uneasy because on the one side of me, I work for tech startups who are growing incredibly quickly. So there are, these companies need, every bit of skin you've got in the game. And at the same time, we know that obviously, if you have a passion for rugby, that's where your heart's really going to be, and where your heart is probably where your conviction and commitment will be. So I've always found that a little bit difficult, but at the same time, obviously, I love sport and, passionately. So I've always wanted to support, athletes as well. So I guess from your perspective, how important has that employer been throughout your career? Not just, back in at university when you had that 6 month, call it sabbatical, but that kind of overall understanding that, we know you love your sport, but we also need to give, you need to give us what we need. How do you balance that basically? And how do you ensure that? What do you look for in employers basically to make sure they are giving you that?
Yeah, I've actually looked out throughout my career, like most in the up and coming rugby game, but especially in the women's game, I've had to work. So when I was at sevens, um, my contracts changed quite regularly. So I would either be full-time pay, and even then at the time, because it was still so new, it's
Mm,
living in San Diego in Southern California, the cost of living is quite expensive. So it was still always going to be a little bit tight, but then there'd be periods where my contract would get cut. It's one of those kind of mind games where it's incentivizing the player. But for someone who's coming out of university with, unfortunately, quite a bit of debt, I also had a dog. You've got expenses to worry about. So during a portion of that, I actually just picked up soccer refereeing on the side. And one thing
mm,
to your point that I looked for was flexibility. Like it was something that would be evenings, weekends, and I was very honest with them from the get go that like, you know, I'm attempting to play for my national team. The boss was actually super elated about it. She was very cool about like,
Mm,
that's amazing. Like, as long as we have notice, as soon as you can, we can work on like the weekend schedules, for instance, not having you that weekend and things. So I was just as soon as I
mm,
would find out, or I would give them the dates for the next 6 months, like these are all the tentative tournaments. Here's when I should know by each time so I can notify you. So then, as she would be doing her weekly or monthly scheduling, she'd kind of put a question mark next to my name for some of those weeks. And so it's just about like planning, transparency, and honesty with your employers. And they'll give it back to you like a
yeah,
good employer. That's what they want. Like they want to have this working relationship, recognize that we're all people, things come up, and they're very supportive. And so, for being, yeah, just a soccer referee, it was quite professional in that sense. But also when I stepped back from sevens, I worked for an SEO marketing company. And one thing I at the time looked for was something remote um, that would be
mm,
easy, that I could work from home. I could still continue
yeah,
training for 15s because that would be all my own time. Play club rugby, which again would be evening. So now I needed to swap gears, go to a day schedule, find a job like that. Also with benefits, leaving sevens, you start to lose the security and benefits. So, but once again, when I did my interview with that employer in 2018, I was actually on a rugby tour. And so even from there, from the get go, I was able to be like, I'm a hard worker. And it was great in the interview. They brought up, I think, kind of like you've touched on, they brought up, like, look, we know you're going to be dedicated. We know you're committed to the job. Like, you've been in sport now for 7 years. Like, we that's a great attribute for us because we know you're committed
mm,
to the team, you're dedicated getting the job done, and we just have to make sure we have flexibility in both of our schedules, and we work together to make both of us successful. And so I've looked out and
yeah,
all the jobs I've had to pick up, like I love a Google Calendar, I love detail, I love trying to make sure everyone knows where I am all the time, and so
yeah.
that worked out in my favor, I think, for a lot of my jobs.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when you look at these jobs, are you starting to think more about career, or are you literally thinking about jobs as in this suits me now, it's good, it works well. But or in some instances, are you really thinking, okay, this job actually is potentially a career move for me. I want to be here for 5 to 10 years, not necessarily because it suits the kind of flexibility you need, but actually it just looks like something that really interests me for when I'm in my mid 30s or mid 40s or whatever, time you get to that point in your life.
Yeah, I think when I was doing the soccer refereeing, that was just a job to survive,
Yeah.
make some extra cash, pay my bills, pay off my student loans, that kind of stuff. So stay afloat was that job. Like I don't aspire to be a soccer referee. In fact, indoor soccer refereeing is very hard. Refing people who come off work, had a bad day, and then you stick
Oh.
them in this wooden box and they kick a ball around, can be quite stressful. So from training from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. international rugby and then going and refing, these just normal everyday people who've had a bad day at work who start slamming each other into boards isn't the most exciting work, but the people I worked with were great. It was a job, it paid the bills. So, but when I got
Yeah.
into the SEO marketing company, it was definitely something uh, at the time I was interested in learning more. How you manipulate the Google algorithm, how you can increase viewership to pages and obviously draw um, better viewerships for companies no matter what. What was cool about that job is all my clients were varied clientele. So uh,
Mm,
I had some home builders who did like modular homes that you could buy. I had some various tech companies that built scanners that they'd sell to like the U.S. Navy to scan boats and look for structural damage deep in the hulls, and an oil company based out of Edmonton, like Canada and stuff. So it was all like quite random, and it was cool because then I got to learn a lot of different things
mm,
and work with different clients and have a bit of structure though too, which was nice, especially coming out of sevens where my life was always planned every single week for 4 years, to then having a bit of like, oh, I've got all this freedom. I crave structure back, and it was nice to have an 8 to 5 that gave me purpose, and a bit of
yeah.
like guidelines and goals again.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, is there a scenario in women's rugby where you can make a living from the sport and not have to work on the side? Or is that the kind of exception to
Yeah.
the rule?
Yeah, it's definitely getting better and better. So, in the last, so post 2017 Rugby Women's World Cup, you had countries like England who were starting to provide some form of a contract to their national team. And at the time, it still wasn't much, but it creates a sense of stability because there's more
mm,
investment than you've had. And then not long after, you've got everyone starting to follow. So since
mm,
2018 till where we are now, for instance, all of your Six Nations teams have some form of a contract. So your Italy's, your Ireland, Scotland, Wales,
mm,
England, France, they all have some form of contract in women's rugby. Um, and a couple of the countries, like it's decent, like England's especially is a very livable wage. They've got three tiers, so I believe all three tiers actually are quite livable. And then you start layering in with a lot of those countries. They're now playing in the PWR, which is our professional league here in England. So on top of that, you might have your English contract and then another additional stipend for your club. So all you're doing is playing rugby year round then, and it is now a very livable wage with bonus structures as well. So depends on the country you're in.
mm,
Those Six Nations countries, as well as your New Zealand, and even Spain actually has a small stipend they give players. Now, again,
mm,
it's not necessarily the most livable, depending on what your means are, but it's at least stability, which gives you a little breathing room. So if you need to pick up extra work, you can. You just don't feel probably as pressured to have to do it. So the long story is
mm,
it's getting there. Country dependent. US, we've recently introduced a 6 months of contracts leading into this World Cup. Once again, it is relatively livable income wise, but again, it depends on what your means are, what your livable outgoing money is. But I'm lucky enough to have that contract as well as a contract here. So once again, you take both of my roles, plus I do coaching on the side, which then helps add a little supplementary. So
mm.
it all ties in really well together. So I currently don't have to do
Okay,
completely different jobs now.
interesting. And at what point in your career did it become, quite difficult? At what point did you think, bloody hell, this is a real grind to keep going, to do a sport that you love? Were there periods you really felt like, okay, now is my time just to hang up the boots and, focus on that career that, you started establishing in kind of digital marketing, for example?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I've had a few bouts throughout my career. So yeah, I started playing international rugby in 2014. I was actually cut in 2016 ahead of the Rio Olympics. So I was cut in May, just short of the
Mm,
Olympics, and that was a summer where you're kind of a bit like, gosh, now what do I do? Like, I definitely don't have this career back in Kansas anymore. I don't have a safety net. I was still refereeing soccer, so took a couple months just ref soccer, tried to get my head back on my shoulders, got asked back to sevens. And I was like, yeah, I need that right now. I crave stability again. And
mm,
did another 2 years. 2018, though, I was really starting to burn out on sevens. And I, by that point, had gone to a 15s Rugby World Cup. And I think that kind of helped reunite some, joy in rugby again. And then going back to sevens, it's
mm,
just tough, like Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It's a tough old job to do. And ended up stepping away from sevens after the Rugby World Cup. And that was a time where I was a bit like, what am I doing? Like, what's next? Like, I've been doing 4 years of this now. Like, who's going to want to hire me? And that's when I ended up finding this SEO marketing company who, again, I think it was great because they reassured me that like athletes are someone that they actually are really interested in, like we've talked about,
mm,
because of your just basic values and work rate and commitment to team and goals. So 4 years of that, I ended up working there and I really enjoyed it. But I got to the point where I moved to England. I had my first professional contract move at the height of COVID, spent 2 years in Exeter playing, and I was doing everything. So I was working this SEO marketing company based out of California from until about 2 a.m., going to bed, waking up, do training all afternoon, come home, work until 2 a.m. And I think that's where it started to pick up that maybe it wasn't my passion anymore. So
mm,
unfortunately, actually, like there was a few years where I really enjoyed my job, and then I got to the point heading into 2021, push to 2022 Rugby World Cup, that I think I had a realization that maybe actually a desk job doing SEO marketing wasn't for me. Like I was good at it, but I'd lost my passion for it, and I'd started getting into
mm,
more rugby coaching. And I think that's where I started to realize I wanted to invest my energy. So ended up leaving that company a couple months ahead of Rugby World Cup. Spent the last few months before Rugby World Cup just focused on that. And when I got back, I started shadowing the men's team at Exeter Chiefs, coaching a women's team as well,
mm,
and starting to do my credentials here in England as well. So my coaching certifications. So that was actually at a moment that I realized I've gone back to the working world and actually maybe kind of the normal desk job doing presentations to clients week in and week out maybe actually wasn't for me. Whereas engaging with the
Yeah.
community and coaching and mentoring um, was actually more, I think, up my alleyway. And so since then, actually, I've been really focused on just coaching, mentoring, delivering school talks. I've done a couple um, gone out in the community, done some like kind of keynote speaking, did one to like a dentist group who's graduating, talked to them about how like rugby and graduating from dentist and the scariness of like not the unknown of the future are quite similar. Um, and so yeah, it's been cool to kind of like try different things and just motivating people via sport, whether it's through the working community or whether it's through like the rugby or other sports communities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often ask my guests, what's that moment where you specifically decide, this isn't for me. So it's quite interesting. You bring up that example where, you're sat in a meeting and it's like, is this me? And
Yeah.
then you actually decide, that there's something more. Um, yeah. What is it, do you think, in that meeting that, because obviously when you're working for a digital agency, you're obviously in front of clients, you're getting the relationship component, you're kind of pitching to people, there's that pressure, there's that, need to deliver there and then. So there are a lot of parallels, I think, in kind of presentations, sales, etc., with sport. Um, it's yeah, probably not the community work that you're kind of now doing now in the rugby world. Um, but I guess, I mean, maybe you did answer it, but I guess what specifically did you feel like, being sat in the meeting, this isn't for me? What were the feelings, what were the emotions of being in that meeting that just made you think this isn't right for me? I think I can do more with myself elsewhere.
Yeah, I think one big piece, to be honest, probably could have even just been the fact that it was remote. I think I just started to crave more of like the personal
Okay.
interactions and connections, which probably didn't help. Um, and I think it was just like crisis management is such a thing in sport and in coaching, but you do more mentoring and learning and teaching and back and forth and less crisis management. Whereas I think when you're in sales and you're dealing with clients, the likelihood of your crisis management weekly starts to potentially become high depending on the team you're working with, the material you're working with, the project you're on. And I just had a few bad bouts with, unfortunately, maybe my teams weren't the best that I was working with. So then trying to coach them, I sometimes have a tendency just to take on more work if I don't trust that someone's going to get the
Mm,
job done. And so you fall into the cycle all of a sudden where I was doing a lot more work than I was intended to do, and you kind of burn out as
yeah.
well. So now you're meeting with the client week in and week out. They're unhappy. You're going back to your team, so you're not getting what you need. You give them what you think they need, but you're still not getting it. Disappointment, etc. So you just kind of get a little burnt out, I think, from some of that. But I think too, just not being able to be in the moment with those people, probably being stuck behind these computers as you problem solve. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of I think a mixture of all of that. Like the day-to-day crisis management after a while just gets a bit exhausting, doesn't it? Where you just feel like you're not getting
Yeah.
anywhere, and then just being stuck behind a computer, like you just crave interaction. I like people, I want to be around
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm into that. Uh, no, that makes complete sense. Um, and another question I've written down is just around your kind of personal branding. And obviously, maybe this doesn't apply quite to you in the same way because you're not going to the job market looking for that first job, having finished your professional career. But I guess you still are a brand. Doesn't matter, what path you're deciding to take. You're still a brand that you're bringing to a rugby club or to a governing body or to an association. So just interested to know, what brand you feel you bring to the table, which is obviously going to be strongly linked to your history as a sports person and a rugby player specifically. I mean, do you think about it much, or are you just you, and it just so happens you is a good brand, or do you actually actively think about how you present all the stuff that athletes tend to bring to the table, but sometimes they're actually shockingly bad. They're actually articulating, why they're a good brand. All the stuff about discipline, the early starts, the rejection, the failure. Did you actively think about that, or do you feel you kind of encapsulate that anyway?
It's interesting. I feel like I probably haven't. I feel like I've fallen into kind of this lull of like I've been a captain for my country for 8 years now. Maybe have I lost the meaning of what that is? I've been lucky
Mm,
enough to captain Ealing Trailfinders this last year, which is nice because it was a different environment. Again, now we're back in a full-time environment working with the coaches. And one thing though, for the last few years, across all of these roles is I've found myself in a lot of like player advocacy groups. So in our USA Rugby Players Association. I've been on the anti-doping committee for World Rugby,
mm,
where they just speak to the players about their input. If there's, if they're coming out with plans, they run it by us, get feedback, things like that. Soon going to be joining a women's high performance 15s committee for World Rugby as well. And I think over the years, what I've started to realize is, these roles I've found myself in. I think my brand has started to become not just a captain and a player, but a player advocate, and the
mm,
opportunity. And even now, for coaching, I just finished my coaching certification here in England, and you have to talk a lot about like your philosophy and how your approach and stuff. And
mm,
I find that my approach is pretty. I try to be pretty even keel, pretty cool, calm, and collected. But I ask a lot of questions because I want players and I want the people I speak to be able to tell me as much as they can. Like, what do they need? What do they aspire for? And how can I make that happen? And that's where I come back to like, I think my brand's now become that like player advocate, like whether that's trying to get the team more of what they need or trying to encourage you to go after what you need and what you need from me to make that happen, if that makes sense. And so it's kind of that two
yeah,
sides of it's coaching, but it's also that player development, player advocacy for the individual and the team.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I'm guessing the player advocacy also opens up more doors generally as well, in the coaching environment and stuff like that, because yeah, that'll always matter quite a bit, I think, the advocacy piece. Um, cool. I've got a couple more questions. Um, one is around, obviously we both know Angus, I think, at Athlete Origin as a mutual connection. Yeah, just how important is it the work that companies like that do in order to support athletes, beyond or during their sporting careers? Um, did you find those sorts of companies quite important because they really get it? Obviously they've got their own experience of elite sport. So yeah, did you find those quite important and quite helpful in your future steps?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I reflect back even on those moments of my career where rugby stopped briefly, whether I stopped it or someone else stopped it, and how kind of scary it was. Like, and I've also seen people younger than me join program, not go to university, come straight into sevens or 15s. And I fear for them a little bit in the sense of like, but what happens? Like, I'd never want to think of that moment of like an injury that takes you out of sport for life. Or again, like you do commit fully 15, 20 years, but once again, what happens then. And so I think it's just important in like reducing that fear and providing again like freedom because when you're in the sport we just want you to focus and it's kind of like right with the US we have these 6-month contracts so these next 6 months all of the players hopefully going to a Rugby World Cup can breathe easier because they don't have to worry about what's next and so companies like Athlete Origin or knowing employers are out there who are very interested in athletes I think helps athletes in the moment hopefully breathe easier when they start to think about what's next, even if they know it's not for a few years. Um,
Yeah.
they at least they know it's there and they don't have to worry too much as long as they continue to remain like again your basic core values. You're still dedicated. You work hard. You're committed. You're honest. You're transparent. Like people will hire you, and so it's making sure that athletes know that across any sport. Um, just knowing that there's stability in your future.
Mm.
It's massive. It just helps you stay focused on this task at hand, knowing that your secondary tasks will be taken care of when you're ready.
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense. And um, two more questions. One is, I promise you, one is if you had advice for, say, a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old girl who's starting to show interest in rugby, um, what would be your advice in terms of how to tackle a career that may or may not include rugby his whole time. But just, yeah, just wondering how you'd broach that topic to make sure that, obviously we know that athletes can get injured in a flash, and what could be proving to be an incredibly promising career ends up being, on the bench pretty much for 3 years, and then it's hard to get back into shape or whatever. Yeah, just curious to know what would be the big advice you have for somebody who's thinking of a future in the professional game.
Yeah. Tackle. Good pun though, to start there. Um, yeah, I think I go into a lot of schools now and I'm just advocating to get them to
Mm,
try rugby. I think there's a massive community there. I was just at a school last week and I was like, look, if you want to find a bunch of weirdos who have tried other sports and they didn't do well at it. They're going to end up in rugby. And if you find yourself like one of those people, come try it. Just the community is massive. And within the
Mm,
community, whether you end up being super good at it or not, you're going to fit in no matter how you look, no matter what you think, whatever your size is, all of that, right? It's a very inclusive
mm,
environment. But with that, I think long term, even if rugby doesn't go your way, the networking potential is massive
mm,
because it's a sport that's still evolving and it's still seeking professionalism. There's still now opportunity because people are working. So if you're 16, 17, stay stuck in it. Go to school. You have to do your work because I do think education is massively important. Even if school's not for you, go to a trade school. Pick up some kind of habit. There's something that interests you. Chase it alongside rugby, but then still find the time to do both because you can do it, right? There's scheduling. You can, if you want to work out during the day, you can find a night job that suits your potential, or you can flip your schedule and do both. Like there's 24 hours in a day. You can still get 8 hours of sleep, train for rugby, and go to school and work for that. So it's hard, but if it's something you want, you'll do it. And again, the beauty is committing to a sport like rugby, you'll find a
mm,
network. And so if sport doesn't work out for you,
mm.
whether it's injury or just you end up not making it as high as you want, you'll find a job, whether it's with a friend's company or someone networks you and links you up with the right people. Just massive opportunity, especially places like England and Great Britain. The rugby network is huge. I can't like turn a corner without meeting someone who knows a rugby player.
Yeah, agreed. And sound advice. How do you tackle somebody who you feel isn't kind of pulling their weight, or somebody who you feel like has more potential but aren't delivering on it? I mean, it's the most infuriating thing in the world to see somebody who's got potential but is not unleashing it. Just out of curiosity, how do you manage that in someone, whether it's somebody in trials or one of your teammates? How do you go about getting that out of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is tough. I think especially as I look at like my career is going to be ending soon, and I think about well, how I want to end as a rugby player, as a teammate, how I want my teams to end, whether it's USA or Trailfinders. Um, and yeah, even the last few weeks, I've been like, you got to get on the bus or get off. Like, I want to go to World Cup and I want to do really well, which is a bit selfish at times. But like for myself, you're right, you have to find that like it is a team sport, but you need everyone to pull your weight to your point. So obviously once you identify someone's not, I think it depends on the level. Obviously I coach at a university and the way I go about it there is going to be completely different the way I go about it with my team. Like when we go into camp next month, I'm going to be a lot like tougher on people. Like if you're not pulling your weight, like get in or get out kind of thing. At that point, you're at the elite level of your game. If you want to go to World Cup, you're
Mm,
going to train the hardest, right? It's a little bit more. You still have to have grace. Are you just having a bad day? Something going on at home? Whereas
yeah,
with the university students, it's a little bit different because once again, you've got 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are balancing school and other things. But if I see that they've got potential, that's where you go back to like, let's ask a few questions. How's life at home? How's life at
mm,
school? What are your goals? Because like I see what your goals are, and I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to explain to them where I think their potential is. But it's good to understand what their goals are. You're going to have players who, God, they're so good, but they just don't care to go in that professional environment. And at some point, as
mm,
tough as it is, you have to respect that and still allow them to be the best player in this opportunity. And then how can you encourage them to maybe carry their gift elsewhere? Maybe they get into coaching down the road then.
mm.
There's other avenues, whether it's also sports science and stuff like that. Keeping people
Yeah,
involved is the biggest. But to answer your question, I think it's definitely based on the environment. Once you get in the elite sport, if someone's not pulling their
yeah.
weight, at some point, check in with them. And if everything's okay, then just you have to give them a bit of a hard word. But if you're in that development, like you've got to have space for people to develop and understand what they want actually out of life and sport.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, how important do you think the kind of innate drive to be successful is in all of that? Because you might argue in some sports where there's clearly a commercial motivation where I don't really love this sport at all, but I love the amount of money I could make and I will destroy anybody who's in my path to get to it. It's certainly one motivation for people who maybe really care about it for whatever reason. For others, it might be just purely innate. And I wonder if rugby, maybe in the last 10 years, maybe less so now because the support is financially a bit more there for you. How much of it is just on the person to know that innately you need to do this because there's no other motivation to want to do this. It's just about how much you love this and how much you're prepared to challenge yourself to be whatever you think is the best you can be. Um, and how do you discover that, and how do you get that out of people? Because it's kind of, it's there, it's not, right? I mean, you've gone through a lot of hard stints, in your career to know that you just need to have that inside of you. And, yes, people can come around and put the environment around you, which I completely agree with at, that kind of development level. But like you say, when it's at the elite end, and it's like, do you want this or not? Just yes or no. If not, then there's no 50% here. There's no 75. It's 100, or you're off. Like how much do you think is about the individual and their innate desire just to want to be the best version of themselves?
Yeah, I think especially in like women's rugby right now, like I said, obviously country dependent, there's a lot of good money to be made. Like being the best player means you're going to be on a higher tier. Um,
Mm,
when you look at all the countries, they all have tiering systems, at least three. So your highest paid, middle, and lowest paid. And then you'll have your players who aren't on a contract. So you'll have desire built in there a little bit to still make it. But at the end of the day, like
yeah,
even for the US, like there's not that much money to be made. So our desire definitely comes from reaching the highest peak as an individual and as a team. Selfishly, when I go out in my career, I want to be, even for probably a year's time, because some other new hotshot will come in and they'll forget about this older lady from America who's pretty decent as back row. But for even 1 year after World Cup, I just want to be remembered as a great player. And then from that opportunity for me, it's about how I then ride that momentum into my future careers as a coach and as an advocate and a mentor and a leader off the pitch. So I think a lot of my teammates are in similar boats. Like you've got your Lona Mar, don't get me wrong, she's done a great job. She's made a brand and she's going out there and getting Adidas to sponsor and
mm,
Maybelline, all these other things. So she's found a way to make a fortune out of it. There's probably a few others coming up the pipeline who see that as an opportunity, but
mm,
at the moment, it definitely sits within what are your aspirations individually and as a team. Do you want USA Rugby to win a gold medal? Then you got to buy into that. That's our motivation intrinsically versus I think in men's rugby at this point. Do I want to go make $500,000? Yeah, why not? I'll play a little longer. Whereas for us, it's like, would I like to make 1,000 a month? Sure. But in the meantime, what I really want to do is be super good at rugby, and be known
yeah,
as one of the best. So um, it's just finding ways to motivate people then, like show them their potential. Like, you're one of the best line out operators on our team. Why not become one of the best line out operators in the world? Make our line out, for example, the most undefendable piece of our game. Your prop
yeah,
become one of the hardest props to scrummage against. There's so many important small pieces of our game that create this whole picture that if you can find players who are really good at a few specifics, the whole team's going to come together, and that's what we have to bring to life, especially for us. But I think in the women's game, once you start to see everyone needs to be a standout somewhere, not for 80 minutes, but for their key roles, you have to be the best of the best in that moment.
yeah. No, it makes sense. It kind of leads down this potential path, which we're not going to touch today, is about the commercialization of sport fundamentally and whether it really drives what we want out of people versus the other inherent motivations for doing it. But cool. Well, look, that takes us through to 47 minutes. I do have one very quick question, which is a one-liner for you. Is basically where do we see you in 5 years' time?
In 5 years, I hope to be coaching some kind of professional team, whether it's in the men's or women's game, making a name for myself, but also providing opportunities for other women to find their path into coaching.
Well, I look forward to seeing headline in 5 years, hopefully. And yeah, based on everything I've heard today and we've recorded, I've no doubt that you're the right person to achieve that. And yeah, we uh, we keep our fingers crossed that it does happen. But yeah, Kate, thanks so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Massively enjoyed it. Yeah, tons of useful snippets, and yeah, really hope our audience will enjoy it too. And yeah, wishing you the very best of luck in your future career, and we'll keep an eye out on you for that golden move in 5 years' time.
Amazing. Thank you for having me today.